Lecture 11C on Ma Lin. Now we come to the third of the four great Academy Masters of the Southern Song, Ma Lin. But since I don't have anything to say about him beyond what's in my lecture that follows, let me use this brief time to reveal what I expect a lot of you have been waiting for and wanting to know. And that is, what is that music that is used in our lecture introductions and endings, set against a section of Xiaogui's Pure and Remote View hand scroll, beginning with shimmering strings and then that very haunting theme coming into the violin? Well, the violinist is Joseph Szigeti, my favorite of all musicians. He died in 1973. He made many recordings. I have nearly all of them, and I've listened to some of them over and over again. And the music is Prokofiev's first violin concerto, which Szigeti promoted. He was, more than any other musician of his time, he was a champion of living composers, and he did the first performances of the works of some of them, Bartók and Stravinsky and Ernst Bloch, often with the composer at the piano or conducting. At any rate, this Szigeti recorded this Prokofiev first concerto, I think it was in 1930, with the London Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Sir Thomas Beecham. It's available on discs if you look hard, and what's played at the end of each of the lectures is the last moments of the first movement. This is an exciting, moving performance, so get it and listen to it if you can. Now, on to look at the paintings of Ma Lin. Now we will look at the painting by Ma Yuan's son, Ma Lin. This is part 3 of lecture 11 on 4 major masters in the Southern Song Academy. Ma Lin, active early to mid 13th century or a little beyond. The dated works actually from between 1216 and 1254. I'll speak of them as we go on. Now that means that he had only about 25 years or so more to live under the Southern Song Academy before it ended. How long he lived, we don't know. Anyway, he was the son of Ma Yuan, as I say, and the member of the 4th generation of famous ancestors in the Academy. He was somewhat overshadowed by these, and of course by his fame of his father. The Song ends, and the Academy with it, that is, as I'll talk about in a bit historically. When I wrote about him in the Skira book, I may have romanticized him a bit. I've been accused of that. We had recently discovered some interesting Ma Lin works, and he looked more interesting, and I've always been, fascinated by the idea of the son of the famous master. What about the sons of Bach? What if you were Wilhelm Friedemann Bach, or Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach? How can you work against, what do you do in the shadow of that great father, or the sons of Wan Zhengming in the Ming Dynasty? Same kind of problem. At any rate, Ma Lin was obviously in a rather difficult position. There's a story, although it's late and maybe apocryphal, about how Ma Yuan signed Ma Lin's name to his own works to enhance the son's reputation, that is, to show people that the son could paint just like himself. But that scarcely meant to build up his confidence. It's nothing that we would think of doing today, I hope. Okay, anyway, so he's in a difficult position, and he paints some quite wonderful pictures, as we'll see, and represents the last of the Ma lineage in the Academy. I'll begin with a fan painting, which is one of everybody's favorites. A lovely, lovely painting, reproduced in the Chinese Art Treasures. I had it in the Skira book and so on. Okay, this is the one titled Waiting for Guests by Lamplight. And if you accept that version, this man is seated inside his pavilion here, waiting for guests to come. But my good friend Li Lin San, whom I quoted several times in these lectures, he had all kinds of good ideas about assigning subjects to paintings. Li Lin San corrected this. I think he's probably right, and added the title sitting up late to gaze at crabapple blossoms. And this is after lines from a poem by Sudong Po, which loosely run, quote, "Fearing that the blossoms will fall while he is sleeping, he has candles lit and sits up gazing at the flowering trees." So if that's right, and I think it makes better sense, really, the original inscription that was, or calligraphy that was with the fan is no longer there, so we don't know. If that is right, and I think it is, then this is a wonderful picture of sort of the evanescence of beauty. The man sitting there, gazing out, the servants standing, waiting for him to light the lamps, so that he can continue to gaze at the blossoming trees. At any rate, the whole mood evoked in it is one of the fragile, the evanescent, like so much else in Southern Sung Academy painting. While the finest Northern Sung landscape conveyed a sense of the eternal, this one evokes a sense of the transience of earthly pleasures. I don't have details, that is, I somehow didn't make them here. I mean, I did make details of the painting, but anyway, we can see it well enough. A wonderfully darkened an evening sky, the moon in the sky, a hillside in the middle right, very much like Ma Yuan's painting, the whole walkway, whatever, of the house running horizontally across, light up under the eaves of the tower here, and the interior lit up, as in his father Ma Yuan's painting, which he must have known very well, of Waiting for Guests by Lamplight. Anyway, and then the trees, and his signature down in the lower right. A wonderfully poetic, evocative, somehow perfect painting. Okay, I also reproduced in the Skira book, and I gave Ma Lin rather more space than some people thought he deserved anyway, because I say I was very interested in this whole idea. The Chinese title written on this leaf is Fragrant Spring, Clearing After Rain, an album leaf in the Palace Museum in Taipei. Maybe it originally was one of a series of seasonal pictures. That's been suggested anyway. Well, I went a bit overboard in writing about it in the Skira book. This was long ago, responding to a seeming break with the Academy, because the painting, it doesn't seem to belong within the Academy style, as though Ma Lin were somehow leaving it a bit behind and turning to depict, as he does here, a more natural tangle, an old dead tree across the water, a sense of a kind of exuberant, undisciplined growth. It isn't a painting that idealizes the subject, as others by Ma Lin and others tend to do. Well, at any rate, it's a fascinating painting. Here's a detail of it showing the old tree, and there's something as if the artist is deliberately, as I say, avoiding the elegant. It's things that are rather crotchety and a bit cluttered. And anyway, quite an interesting painting, however you read it. But it shows something of the breadth of Ma Lin, that he can do this too. Now, this is probably the best-known painting of Ma Lin. It's the one titled Listening to the Wind in the Pines. The title is written in the upper corner there, imperial script, of course, and there's a seal on it with a date corresponding to 1246. So this is a dated painting again. This is one of the few really large-scale works surviving from the Academy. It's no less than 90 inches or 7.5 feet tall. Huge picture, and in fine condition. The subject, as you see, is, as the title suggests, listening to the wind in the pines. The man sits on the bole or the trunk of the pine tree, which conveniently runs along the ground to form a seat before it rises again and twists and elegantly. He sits there looking out at us, or rather looking a bit sideward, as if toward his servant, who stands in the usual servile position in the lower left here. Well, the person in the painting here, let's see, the next, here's the, put the detail beside it. Yeah, here he is, an elegant scholar, the so-called Gausser again, who populates these paintings. In my Lyric Journey book, I discuss the question of just who we see as the source of expression of these paintings. It isn't exactly the artist. The artist isn't expressing himself. To try to say that would be absolutely wrong. It isn't exactly the imperial person who wrote the poem. Those are rather conventional derivative poems. And so, well, what is it? Okay, I discussed this there, and I won't try to do it again, but the point is that these Gausser, these lofty scholars, were not painted by the scholars themselves. Scholar artists never did that. They didn't paint figures much at all. And it was done, in other words, by the Academy artists who are recreating a kind of ideal image for people who would receive these paintings and who would hang them and who would enjoy them. Well, this one, as you see, is looking a bit sideward, and the wind blows his beard a little bit, just as it's blowing the vines hanging from the pine tree and the branches of the pine. But he sits there in an attitude that indicates he's very conscious of being looked at, or so I would take it anyway, as if he's somehow acting out his own feelings. It's no longer the kind of natural relationship to the landscape that we saw from early painting, northern stone painting and so on. Here we're, shall we say, on the edge of what we might find a little too contrived, obvious, and done for effect. So it's at the very end of a long process of change in the relationship between man and nature as portrayed in landscape painting. And here, as I say, man occupies the very center. He was already that in the paintings of Yuan, as I pointed out in talking about them, but even more obviously so here. Well, while this is on, let's see, here's the man, and you see he's got his lips slightly pursed, and his eyes sideward, and, well, he is sort of consciously looking elegant and looking inward, although really he's projecting an image of himself, we might say. And here, the pine tree with it, detail of the pine tree with tried wonderful twisting, but expressive. I mean, powerfully expressive, more so, as if the pine again is bent and twisted and blowing and so on for our admiration. It isn't a kind of a natural look of the way the pine tree really is, anything like that. And here further up, more of the pine. And look at the way the bark is done with calligraphic strokes. Not expressive calligraphic like one Renhua, but something that suggests the elegance of the artist's hand and of the speed with which you finish the painting and so on. And on a big picture like this is all right. Of course, it wouldn't work on a small picture. But at any rate, and the, firm outlines of the distant hills, very much like Yuan and his father. And here in the lower right, a scene of the running water. Everything in the picture is elegant. Everything seems as if made to be gazed at. Everything suggesting a bit, as I say, contrived. All right. Well, let me talk a little bit about Southern stone painting while we have this on. The effects of Southern stone painting are typically achieved through juxtapositions of opposites, contrasts. That is, space versus mass, full versus void, man and nature, in a subject-object relationship. This is anti-Zen, among other things. Zen painting, which we'll talk about, is tried to do away with just that kind of opposition or whatever. That this should coexist with Zen painting, as it does, which we'll see in the next lecture, is another of those kind of bipolar situations that are typical of the period, I think. Something of unity giving way to, contrast. Later writers, looking back onto Southern stone painting with some dismissal, shall we say, talk about Yuan's painting as representing leftover mountains and surviving streams. In other words, the reduced area under which Chinese were now living under Chinese control, the political weakness of China was tied to the character of the paintings. And part of the dismissal of the paintings was because of this political connection which they were able to put on it. In any case, the meaning of the painting somehow was moved inward. The painter doesn't attempt to express the sense of comprehension of the world, the degree of control that early painting does. Nature is tamed. Nature is made expressive for our purpose, so to speak. But the kind of degree and involvement with nature also changes. In Ma Lin's painting, as we've seen, self-consciousness is a very strong element as it runs through Southern Shang landscape generally. The subject of the painting is presented not for participation so much. You don't enter into the picture and move around, but you gaze at it, admire. The subject seems to present himself at this extreme point for our admiration. And as I say, the scholar ideal expressed in this way, according to the Confucian ideas, is contrary to the scholar artist's own ideal, and they don't paint pictures of this kind. Okay, anyway, that's issues that I discussed, as I say, in the lyric journey. Well, okay, so much for that. It's a remarkable painting and fine painting, but here's a great one of those art historical inevitabilities, which they really aren't, which we aren't supposed to use. You can't speak of something representing sort of end of the line. That belongs to a kind of romantic narrative art history that we don't do anymore, except it still comes to mind for me. Okay, anyway, now let's go on. Here's a painting, quite a lovely little picture, which is a sunset landscape in the Nezu Museum in Tokyo, with a seal dating it to 1254. So this is a very late painting, reproduced in the 3,000 Years book in Saran, Lure, everything. Well, okay, here is the two lines, a couplet, 2 5-character lines written here as if in the sky. Hills enclosing autumn colors draw near, swallows traversing the evening light move slowly. Picture, and then that is what is pictured below, an image of perfect simplicity and peace. Well, so we used to talk about it. Everybody did. And then it's Li Huishu, the scholar who teaches at UCLA, who was seeing this painting in the Nezu Museum, I guess, photographing maybe, I don't know, and who points out what should have been seen by others, that in fact there's a break, a seam of join between somewhere sort of halfway between the bottom of the calligraphy and the upper part of the hills, going across the painting. And originally it was 2 leaves. It was 2 album leaves, one of them beside the other, confronting the other in an album maybe. And the Japanese have mounted them together to make this what we have taken to be a evening scene with a very with a tall sky and this writing up in the sky. Okay, so much for that. Now we see it for what it really is. Here is a slide, by the way, that unfortunately is taken from the original, but it doesn't really convey the quality of the painting very well. The painting is badly cracked from rolling it as a hanging scroll, as I've spoken about before. And the colors don't come out very well, and so on. The other one taken from reproduction. Okay, here is a slide of the calligraphy done in the imperial hand, and this elegant imperial calligraphy. And here is a slide just from a photograph. I'm sorry I don't have an original of the painting. Well, it's a lovely little painting still. I mean, even if we see it this way, that is hills, swallows flitting over the surface, sunset light. Here's a detail of the swallows. Well, that's all I have. I wish I had a good one of the evening light or the lower part of the whole. Anyway, quite a lovely picture, and representing the late style of Ma Lin. During this long career, if he worked for decades in the academy, he must have produced huge numbers of paintings of this kind. And we have quite a lot of them, actually. I could show a number of other signed Ma Lin pictures. One in Cleveland, very simple, representing somebody reaching the end of a road and gazing out over the water. let me remind you again, I've shown before, his quite wonderful painting of the branches of blossoming plum, the one titled something like Icy Tips. This one does have the inscription above by Yang Meizi, or Empress Yang, who was the consort of the Emperor Ningzong. And I think it must have been Ningzong who wrote the calligraphy on the other picture. This one has a seal with the date 1216, fairly early in his work, presumably. Well, okay, by 1254, the time of the Nezu painting, China had been defeated militarily for 20 years and had been fighting the Mongols under the great Genghis Khan. Later, Mongol rulers Ogedai Khan and eventually Kublai Khan of Coleridge's poem. In 1234, the Jin, the Jurchens in the north, fell to the Mongols. Southern Sung was surrounded then on the north and on the west in Sichuan, and only left a very small area under their rule. The Mongols' push was delayed by a struggle over the succession after the death of Ogedai. I mean, the Mongol ruling family couldn't agree easily on who was to succeed. That also, by the way, saved Europe from a planned invasion which would have simply devastated Europe and changed the whole of Western history, shall we say. At any rate, Kublai Khan succeeded in 1260. He concentrated his energies on China. The Sung held out until 1277, when the last Sung claimant to the throne was killed in a sea battle off the coast. An old nurse takes him in her arms and jumps into the sea, as I remember. The last pretender to the throne was destroyed in 1279, and that's the usual date for the end of Sung. And that, of course, will be the end of this course, except that I still have a few more things to talk about. During this late period, when Ma Lin and the artist we'll see next, Liang Kai, were active, peace was possible only in Buddhist monasteries, and painting of the late Sung belongs largely to Chan monks, as we'll see, as it has been preserved in Japan. And the last lecture will be mostly about them. But first, I want to show a few more Academy things. So a little bit more of Ma Lin, finishing on this lovely picture of plum, and then I'll go on. At any rate, okay. Here I've shown before, so I'll go through rather briefly. This is the plum branches, Ma Lin's signature in the lower right, the title written in the upper left, and here close up. As I say, these are artists of great versatility. They can do anything you want. Ma Lin was quite capable of figure painting, as Ma Yuan was. And whatever you asked for, he would be able to do, so to speak. Here's the another close-up. Marvelous blossoms with very delicate, fine branch. But this, as I've said in showing others, is somewhat impersonal. It isn't too different from the way these were done back in the time of Huizong. Okay, next please. And here, again, when I showed before, an album leaf that's in the Palace Museum in Taipei, in which the bamboo and plum twig, blossoming plum, are reflected in the water below. It's some damage from, well, whatever, green disintegration, but still you can see it, which must be a matter of his responding to a poem in which the reflection of these things in the water was mentioned. Also by Ma Lin, and demonstrating again the versatility of Academy artists, are a series of nearly life-size portraits of Confucian sages and worthies, each one of them 2.5 meters high, originally 13 of them, from which 5 survive. 4 were in the Possessing the Past exhibition, catalog pages 257 to 259, and were written up by Wenfeng. These were commissioned in 1230 by the Emperor Lizong, who wrote the tributes above the figures. These 4 represent, from left to right, the legendary sage kings Yao and Yu, King Tong of the Chang, and King Wu of Zhou. The series was enshrined in the imperial temple as a sign of legitimacy, but the Song dynasty lasted only a brief time longer before being wiped out by the Mongol invasion. Next, please. Continuing now with a few more album leaves by or associated with Ma Lin, here is one of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, plate 65 in Wenfeng's Beyond Representation book. About 25 centimeters square, it's from the old Barr collection purchased in 1947. So it's another example of the early U.S. collectors' passion for paintings of the Ma Xiao school. Wenfeng discusses this one as featuring forms like Ma Yuan's, but, quote, what he calls curiously heavy and static. And he says, on what basis I don't know, that it's datable to the late 1250s. And he sees in it, quote, a dark and foreboding quality suggestive of impending doom, end quote. I don't know if I would go that far, but it's true that Ma Lin seems in hindsight to be bringing to a close a long development of landscape style from Li Tong through his followers and Ma Yuan and now to Ma Lin. This is quite separate from the achievements of Xiaogui, which fall somewhat outside that development in the lineage of pure ink monochrome painting, as we saw at the end of the previous lecture. Next, please. Two fan paintings. The one at left in the Palace Museum, Beijing, reproduced as number 72 in their big volume of Sung album leaves. The one at right in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, reproduced as plate 59 in Wenfeng's book, and called there Unidentified Artist Mid-13th Century. This one was in the Crawford collection. Both are good or bad examples of that hardening of the Ma Yuan manner that afflicts it around the end of the Sung. Part of the reason, but only part, why it was so strongly rejected by most artists and critics of the Yuan period. The solitary scholars, the dramatically silhouetted pine trees, the evening skies with moons have somehow lost their appeal and are hardened and conventionalized. Next, please. But still another typical aspect of this end of the Sung stage in the Li Tong to Ma Yuan lineage, seen here in two album leaves in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. The one at left, a signed work of Ma Lin, the one at right is ascribed to Ma Yuan, is this way of giving over most of the picture space to blank silk, representing usually an expanse of water. In the Ma Lin painting at left, a nobleman is seen riding a stag along the lakeside road, his servant following him carrying a large fan. He has come out riding this unconventional steed to admire autumn foliage. In the other leaf, the one ascribed to Ma Yuan, the man lies in his boat near the shore, gazing across the whole expanse of water at the very minimally represented distant hills. The time is probably evening. The sky is darkening, and evening mists obscure much of the scene, just as they do in the Nezu leaf by Ma Lin, with swallows flitting across the surface of the water catching insects, which is in that way somewhat similar to this. It's unlikely that Ma Yuan painted this, but Ma Lin could have. The next, please. Other examples of the same type are these two album leaves in the Cleveland Museum of Art, both signed works by Ma Lin, who uses the form Chun Ma Lin that indicates she did them for the emperor, your servant Ma Lin. The emperor, we know from records, presented hundreds of paintings to the courtiers and others on state occasions, and Academy painters must have had to mass-produce these in a way that encouraged repetitiveness and abbreviation. These two were now numbers 56 and 57 in the 8 Dynasties catalog, but they appear there without proper entries, written entries. They were part of the large group assigned to Wai Gam Ho, who wrote whatever he wrote with great care and after much research, but who never developed the museum curator's knack for fast, adequate writing. Sherman Lee was very upset by Weigam's failure to finish these. Anyway, both paintings exemplify the phenomenon I was describing. In the square one, a man walks on a lakeside path. The top of the distant ridge and a flight of geese make up the rest of the composition. The round one is even simpler, a weary traveler who sprawls where his road ends at the water's edge. He gazes across at what must be the most minimal hilltop in all of Chinese painting. I remember writing Sherman Lee something funny about this when he acquired it, about how it was the ultimate end-of-the-road painting in all senses. No figure was ever so limp, no spacious composition was ever so abbreviated. Next, please. Another example of the same phenomenon, not ascribed to Malin, is this album leaf in the old Freer collection, acquired by Freer in 1911. I published it as Plate 25 in my Chinese album leaves booklet, guessing at a slightly post-Sung date then, but leaving the date open. Now I would think rather of late Sung. As I wrote there, a tiny signature on the left edge can't be identified. A fisherman sits in his boat under low pine trees in the foreground. On the far shore, a covered bridge spans an inlet, and a pavilion is seen through bare willows. All these minimal pictures evoke separation, and we're once more brought up against the theme of lateness and loss that pervades so much landscape painting of the late Sung so piercingly. Next, please. That's all for Malin. Let me only add that in my 1960 Scarab book, I devoted 3 plates to him, these two plus a full page to his 1246 Listening to the Wind in the Pines, which we talked about at length. I talked about at length in the lecture before. And I presented him in my text as a more complex figure than anyone had realized. Perhaps I romanticized him a bit over the edge, dwelling on the predicament of the son of a famous father. Richard Vinograd read this passage aloud at a symposium a few years ago about old-style narrative art history as a good example of the kind of writing nobody does anymore, but that has its appeal when it's done as well as I could do it then, and I probably couldn't do it now. So again, I end by saying here is a great dissertation topic for someone who wants to revisit an old, long-neglected subject. All right, next, please. Okay, now before we go on to I'll show a few more Southern Sun leaves and talk about my lyric journey idea, narrative. But I want to show 3 quite wonderful pictures, 2 of them in particular, all 3 really. Anonymous pictures from the 13th century. Originally they were attributed to Huizong, which made no sense. This is an old Japanese attribution. But they are landscapes of originally the 4 seasons, and 3 of them survive in temples in Kyoto, the Konchi-in and the Kuonji, reproduced in Siren, the lyric journey, and so on. And they're very fine 13th century paintings of a kind that are preserved only in Japan. And again, to say it over and over, if we're left to the Chinese scholar artists and their critics and so on, Chinese critics, we wouldn't have anything like this. They didn't consider it worth preserving. I did read a passage from Lure earlier, but let me remind you of a 12th century writer about how subtle effects of fog and mist and rain and so on are difficult to depict, and yet the artist can do them. Well, that's partly what is achieved here. Let me show the 3 leaves. This, I think, the most conventional of the 3 must be the autumn leaf, I guess it is. Anyway, our noble scholar, Gauscher, is down here at the lower right, leaning against a tree, relaxing very comfortably, and the branches of the pine tree kind of emphasize the diagonal thrust of the whole, or of the composition, as does the slope of the ridge beyond. Here is closer up in a rather more contrasty slide. Well, he's a standard figure by now, not unlike the person in the Ma Lin painting who was looking out and looking over his servant and so on, rather conscious. Things such as the green color over ink on the bamboo leaves, or down on the lower left, big dian or dots on the landscape forms, and green spots of mineral green over the black. These belong to a late 13th century stage in painting in China. Otherwise, yes, here's the figure. The face may be a little too expressive for us, slightly bulging cheek and narrowed eye and so on. And he leans, I say, looking very comfortable and very conscious. And here you can see quite well these dian, or dots with a big green thing. We'll see a few of those, I think, in paintings associated with Liang Kai and others. So anyway, they belong to the end of Song, and I'm carried on a little bit in a later painting. The next, and here you don't normally notice this, but here out in the sky, in the evening sky that he's gazing into, he's not just gazing into space, he's watching two cranes who are wheeling in the sky out there, sort of enjoying the sunset light maybe, or so he's imagining. Quite a lovely idea, but rather more conventional, like Mao Yuan's pictures of scholars down in the corner of the picture looking at the moon or whatever. Now, the next one, however, is not conventional at all. And there is, in fact, no other painting quite like this. And it's one of my favorite of all Chinese paintings, really. Anonymous, I say, anonymous, 13th century. This is the one, this is the winter scene, and it represents our scholar figure down here, robed, heavily robed and with a hood over his head, carrying his staff, and he's walking through a ravine, and he turns to look back. And what is he? Is he just simply listening to the waterfall? I'll show you in a minute. At any rate, this is a picture that is superb in its handling of space. We haven't seen anything quite like it. First of all, in the late Song, we'll see other examples, or maybe we have seen already. We see compositions in which the diagonal division puts the weight in the upper part. That is a heavy, heavy overhanging cliff, as here. That overhanging cliff, and then nearer us, this huge boulder that juts in from the lower left, and down below it a darkened, shadowy area. But the modeling of these and the whole use of ink washes for space, not in any simple way. They aren't simply modeled by, dark and light in the usual sense. And in fact, the whole space is handled in a way that's hard to analyze, but it works marvelously. It's as though the space comes out of the interior of the painting and in a kind of S-curve into the foreground, around this rock and under the overhanging cliff. Okay, here we have a few details of this. Yes, here's the foreground, and here you can see there's bamboo, small bamboo growing here, plus the two marvelous bamboo stalks that push up from the rock into the space. Here's the figure, as I say, hooded, turning back, holding a staff, walking, pausing. There's this momentary feeling about the painting. He pauses for a moment to look back, to look up. And you can see here, by the way, the bit of snow on the bamboo down below his feet. And what is he looking at? Okay, here is the upper part. An old tree up over the waterfall, an old plum tree. And in it, two gibbons. Okay, he is listening to the cry of the gibbons, as well as the sound of the waterfall. And the cry of the gibbons in poetry in China is a kind of metaphor, symbol, whatever, for the extreme wilderness, for the wilds, and the response of people to natural sounds. Being out there and hearing the cry of the gibbon is very moving. The gibbon is a wonderful creature anyway. I mean, Zhang Daoqian kept gibbons, and I always went to the gibbon cage, first of all, with my children when we went to the zoo. They're wonderful to watch, so I won't get into gibbons. I can talk on gibbons. Okay, anyway, here they are, two of them, in the tree up here above the waterfall. Hard to see. You don't notice them at first. And then once you notice them, then you understand the whole structure, the whole expressive structure of the picture. This slide, by the way, shows you very well the wonderful way this artist paints these two long stalks of bamboo and surrounds them in space. How does he do this? How can you think of anything in Western painting that does anything comparable, or very little in Chinese painting for that matter? Bits of snow on the bamboo. Okay, a wonderful, wonderful painting, and as I say, one of my favorites in all of Chinese painting. And then the third of this group, which is the summer scene. This one has sustained more damage than the others, and it's damage from this green pigment that causes the deterioration. We saw it in a Li Tong hand scroll and other things, and I pointed it out numbers of times, Rokusho Yake, of which there's an article in my website, as you know. Okay, anyway, this is the summer scene. It's a summer rainstorm, and our main figure here, down below, wearing a cap and carrying a staff and so on, is about to cross a bridge, but he turns to look up the ravine, maybe not so much attracted by any particular sound, but just by the sheer sound of the water and the wind in the pine, blowing the tassels of his cap. Oh, wonderful. Okay, let's see the details. There have been numbers of cases of paintings of storms in China, but I can't think of any that quite matches this in the actual getting the sense of a rainstorm. And well, here down at the bottom, here you can see the deterioration where the silk has been eaten away, and a large boulder, and the other side, the slope on the other side, and the water rushing down, and he turns. His robe blown by the wind, turns to listen to the sound of the wind. Here he is a little bit up closer. It's an expressive figure, and uses his hand holding the staff and so on. Very finely drawn. The boulder in this case is rather simply drawn, but it's seen through the rather foggy or murky atmosphere of a rainy scene. Okay, then here my favorite passage, really up above. Well, what is represented and what is suggested and so on. Oh, it all works together. The sound, the rush of the wind, the pounding of the rain, the things are barely there. You see the top of the old pine tree with its blown by the wind, and it's seen as if through atmosphere, so it's maybe a bit murkily seen. And then way up at the top there's maybe a bare willow tree, a bare tree anyway, bent by the wind and barely seen. And then, quite wonderfully, over here in the middle right, there's a bit of slope which has just enough light and dark, so texturing almost, to suggest that it's an earth mass, and below it a sloping line. And just above that, between that and the tree, is a horizontal brushstrokes of white ink that represent the rain. So everything is fused here into one superb vision that cannot be easily separated into things and atmosphere and movement and whatever, but it all works together marvelously. Oh, well, anyway, what a painting. And this kind of painting, that is travelers making their way through a landscape and being affected by the scenery and the atmosphere and everything, must have been a whole genre. And there must have been, many paintings of this kind, not just the missing one for the spring scene we don't have. But, oh God, all lost, except for this chance survival of these three wonderful paintings in a Kyoto temple. Okay, enough for that. I lament this over and over. Okay, here we go. Now, in my Lyric Journey book, I propose that behind a lot of Southern Song painting is a kind of ideal narrative, which is, I propose it in 4 parts. It could be done otherwise, but their Gausher, or the ideal figure or whatever, is living in retirement or living in the country or living anyway. And then someone comes to visit him maybe, and then he ventures out to make his way through the world and enjoy the scenery. And then you see him doing various things, admiring the waterfall or whatever. And then the return, which is very important, especially important in Southern Song painting. Okay, and I even read the long Xiaogui scroll in my previous talk as really representing that ideal narrative in its sequence of bits of scenes involving people, and ending with a wonderful, well, we'll come to that in a moment. Okay, here we go. I'll show you some examples illustrating that to bring out this point. This is painting attributed to Zhao Bosu up here in the upper right, you can see. But he's the younger brother of Zhao Boju, and there are paintings attributed to him, including a very fine hand scroll in Beijing. But I didn't treat him. At any rate, the attribution is meaningless. It's later than his time, and it's a Southern Sung Academy work, Li Tong follower, probably with that pine tree, and someone a little bit like Mao Yuan a little earlier, maybe. Anyway, fine painting, and it represents a man in his house, living in retirement, his servants waiting on him, or two of them bringing something on the right, waiting for guests to come, presenting himself, you see here in the detail, as if sort of, here I am for your admiration. A bit too much that way, maybe, for our purpose, but anyway. And here you see around him paintings, a painting mounted in the panel at the end of the bed, or his bed here, what seem to be two hanging scrolls mounted on a screen over at the right of him, and then behind him a large landscape screen or wall painting, whatever, and various books, and open book and so forth, wine bottle. Anyway, and he holds a fan and he looks out at us, and he's obviously, as I say, very conscious of being looked at. Okay. I found two more details from this leaf in my old slide collection. One from the left side, showing the two female servants on the porch outside his room, waiting for him to summon them and ask them to mix him a martini or whatever. As is so often the case in Sung paintings of paired women, one of them leans on the other in a way that almost suggests an erotic attachment between them. Next. On the other side, outside the house, two boy servants approach, one of them carrying a tray with things to eat and drink. They turn to face each other, but this is just a compositional convention. No erotic attachment is intended here. We know, however, that boy servants, known as bitung, were frequently subject to the pederastic urges of their masters, used as catamites, that is. This is one of those truths about old China that now seem more than a little hard to face. But consorting with the bitung was not only something that carried no special stigma, but it could sometimes be considered, in fact, more refined than heterosexual relationships with female courtesans or prostitutes. But I wander from our subject. Back to the lyric journey theme. Next. This one is in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. I don't remember what the attribution is. It looks rather like Mao Yuan, somebody contemporary with Mao Yuan, conceivably even Mao Yuan himself. The willow trees are very much like the ones in the famous Mao Yuan painting in the same collection. Here are two willows, one a bit closer, one further back. Between them, a thatched house opening on the water, which is the retirement home, or the rural home, at any rate, of one of these gauchers. And he's entertaining a friend in this case, his friend probably with a dark coat, who has come across the bridge along this path which leads in the lower right, and then a rather Mao Yuan-like distant hill. And lovely painting. Okay, so much scholar living in retirement. Oh, here's a painting in the Metropolitan Museum I haven't shown before. This was previously C.C. Yuan. I remember it as his. Some Li Tong follower. I don't remember what the attribution is. It doesn't matter so much. Anyway, a bluff coming diagonally, making our Southern Sung composition, with vegetation on the top, or pine trees presumably, powerful, and then off on the left a flowing river, and a path running around the bluff and coming into the foreground, sort of a distant foreground. This is a living in retirement scene, because the path, after going over a bridge, ends up, it's hard to see here, ends up at a gate in a brushwood fence. You don't see the house at all. It's hidden by leafy trees in the middle left here. But it, you know that this is the retirement home, or the rural home, whatever, of one of these Gausser, and that he can and will come issuing out at some point and make his way around the path and out into the rest of the world. Okay, lovely picture. The next, here we go. Now, this is one of two leaves in the Osaka Municipal Museum, quite fine, attributed to Xiaogui, but just, I think there may even be a signature, but uncertainly I wouldn't be clear about Xiaogui, just anonymous, good Southern Sung Academy works. Here is the scholar coming out, issuing out from his house, the servant behind him sweeping the leaves from the area outside the gate, or outside the house, I mean, and he stands in a posture suggesting that he's responding to, it's hard to say, is it morning or evening? Let's say it's morning, and he's setting off on his journey, making his way off somewhere to visit a friend or whatever he's going to do. And here is the next from the same album, maybe the same artist, in which our scholar, accompanied by his servant, carrying the usual chin, the musical instrument, the zither, stands on a ledge gazing at the waterfall. Okay, I talked about gazing at waterfall pictures on the talk on Yuan, so I won't do that again. And it looks like maybe a slightly evening sky, a bit darkened, and he looks across the ravine, and the waterfall is among these quite Li Tong-like needle peaks. That's all very much Li Tong style. Okay, fine little painting. As for what you do when you're out in nature, here's a lovely picture, which, as I remember, is in the Palace Museum in Taipei. I know I have the slide. I don't remember who it's attributed to. Doesn't matter anyway. A lovely painting it's an autumn scene, because in the upper middle you have two trees, one growing upward and then below it to the right, another that sticks out from the cliff and hangs down in part with vines hanging from it, with red leaves. So we know it's autumn. Now, our figures, in this case, are several old men, let's assume, who we see a bit to the right of center down below, in a ravine, as if they are seated around a table or talking or doing something. They have come out there either by making their way along the path that runs at the bottom of the cliff here. You can see it coming from the left. Or they come out of the ravine. There seems to be a way of going back there, as is suggested. Their servant is seated, as always, just beside them. Anyway, the idea of coming to this misty ravine and finding a place where they can sit and talk about old times or talk about literature or whatever they're talking about, really quite evocative, poetic, lovely leaf. Very little color, very simple, but yet profound in its implications. Okay, on. Now this one, not profound at all. This is quite strong, though. This is a leaf in the Palace Museum in Beijing, as I remember. It's in China, I'm pretty sure. There may be an attribution, Liu Shengnian or something like that, I don't remember, but I've always liked this leaf as a good Southern Sung Li Tong follower. Picture of people, two men with their servant carrying a lot of luggage, arriving at a house. Now, whether they're coming to visit a friend or whether they're one of them is the occupant of the house with his friend arriving home late, or just what it is, we can make our own decision. An accompanying inscription probably told us what it was, but as it is now, we have to sort of guess from the painting. At any rate, a dramatic pine tree pushing out diagonally in the usual way, heavily textured and dark rocks and cliff in the lower section of the painting, and the house seen among the trees, some red leaf trees suggesting autumn as the season. Anyway, as an evocative, suggestive, well-done leaf. Seals of Geng Zhaozhong down here on the left, fine collector. Here, this one is not, this is very, very different. This is the Palace Museum in Beijing. I think I reproduced it in the Lyric Journey book and talked about it. And I think I was corrected by somebody, Peter Sturman, I think. I got it wrong, but what I said, and my memory is not good enough to tell you the right answer. But anyways, it's a man on his donkey coming back from coming back late from a drinking party, probably. He looks a little unsteady, and his servant is carrying what seems to be a stack of picnic trays, is what it is. The Chinese have, and the Japanese too, a very, very fine kind of arrangement of lacquered trays for food stacked together and easy to carry. And then at the other end of the pole is presumably his wine pot. I think that's what it is. Anyway, he's arriving at either his house in the country or a village, a rural inn. Open for him, a dog barking, another servant or somebody coming up from the water. I don't know what's going on there. And blossom. Oh, it's an inn, of course. Here's the flag. The flag sticking up from the right end. And he's going to arrive there and stay overnight and then go on probably. Blossoming trees and identifying the scene as spring. So it's a spring evening. Interesting leaf. Now here's just the idea of return, continuing on that. This is a detail from fan painting in the Boston Museum, which I've shown twice, I think, attributed to Fan Quan. I'm just reminding you that the main theme of it is a traveler, or whoever it is here, with not a traveler, no luggage, no servant, but someone returning from working, that is, under a parasol, under an umbrella, and arriving at houses among the bamboo. And here, here's the lower part of the famous Yuan painting in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, in which a farmer is coming back at evening to cross the bridge and arrive at his home. A lovely late evening scene. And here is one from a Shaogui scroll, a Shaogui fan painting that I showed, a signed work, a winter scene in which the farmer, it must be, the rustic anyway, something over his shoulder, is going to arrive at the houses built by the water. Okay, this theme runs over and over through Southern Song painting. And I've talked about it at length, so I won't just do it all again. But this theme of lateness and, okay, it's there in the lyric journey. I won't do it again. And here, there's the scene from the Great Shaogui Scroll, which I talked about in the previous section. And this is the passage near the end. The sky is darkening. The landscape is becoming simpler. A huge boulder urges us, pushes us, impels us leftward toward the conclusion, which is about to come. A small figure on the bridge, a rustic of some kind, is making his way across the bridge and is going to arrive at the inn, which very quietly, wonderfully closes the scroll. And a slope, sloping upward kind of land urges us again, sort of takes us toward that. The flowing of the water, quite beautiful, wonderful. Okay, I made another point I made in my lyric journey book, which I should simply quickly repeat here, is the point about how so much of what we think of as Academy painting was really done outside the Academy. Here I think I quoted the Jacques Jarnet book that I recommended at the beginning of this lecture on daily life on the eve of the Mongol invasion in China. That is 13th century Hangzhou, based on lots of translations of texts of that time and slightly later. At any rate, from that, one learns that if a painting is done in the Academy, copies of it will immediately be on the market before the sun has set, and imitations, and everybody knows about it, and everybody does more. So in other words, in addition to the painting that was going on in the Academy, large amounts, probably larger, certainly larger, were being done on the outside by artists who were not of the Academy, but working in that same style. Lots of them probably. And I use the example here, Ma Yuan's Banquet by Lantern Light, this wonderful painting, very probably by Ma Yuan, showing the interior of the palace, but also dancers, women dancers, and also playing pipa on the, maybe not so much dancing, but playing pipa in a kind of solemn way, seen through the blossoming trees here. At any rate, this may have been so popular that other artists took the idea and began to paint pictures showing something like that. Here is one of them that I reproduced. Palace Museum, Beijing, Gengzhou seals again. And here are the figures. The women and servants are standing on the outside gazing into the interior. And we imagine a banquet or party of some kind going on there, and the guests looking out, hearing the music, gazing at the pond of the lake there under the trees. Anyway, lovely, lovely, but somewhat more conventional and probably inspired by something like Ma Yuan's painting. And here another one, also I think Palace Museum, Beijing, in which the roofs of the palace are seen in the lower right, and willow trees around them, and another shoreline or edge of the pond going up on across the upper right here. And down below, again, we see the terrace outside the palace, something going on inside, a party presumably, women at the far end of the terrace with musical instruments playing, and servants waiting. No, it's also playing flutes, it appears. Yes, probably the part of the orchestra is in the nearer end of the terrace, and the women are maybe dancers. At any rate, entertainers and other servants arriving or bringing wine and so on. So, okay, lovely pictures, but rather more derivative, suggesting, as I say, that anything that happens in the academy was probably quickly imitated and copied and so on outside. And we should recognize, I think, that when we talk about the audience for these paintings, that most of it is really maybe merchant class people and people with enough wealth to acquire them, but outside the academy, that this was a huge production. We talk about academy painting, but we mean academy style painting, and a great deal of it must have been done outside. Before concluding this lecture on Ma Lin, I want to add a few more album leaves, either because they illustrate further the lyric journey theme, or because I have nowhere else to put them and don't want to leave them out. Next, please. This fan-shaped album leaf, of which I found slides in my old collection, carries an old and meaningless attribution to an early Sung artist named Yen Su. In fact, it's a fine work by some follower of Li Tang, painting probably sometime in the 12th century. The subject belongs within our lyric journey sequence to the opening type, the secluded residence where the retired scholar or recluse lives comfortably in a cluster of thatched houses at the foot of a cliff, with trees and bamboo around him, a running stream nearby, and leading away from the house to the left, a road that will carry him whenever he chooses to venture out into the farther distance, represented by the continuation of the road in the middle left. Next, please. This could be the work of one of the Yen brothers or someone close to them. It precedes the degeneration of the style that we saw on a leaf by Jia Shigu, or the transformation of it in the hands of Ma Yuan and Xia Gui. Nothing in the picture is hurriedly done or faked. The artist knows, and he shows us exactly how the recluse or his servants would have built a rustic fence around the house, and also along the water's edge. Next, belonging to the third stage of the lyric journey, in which the lofty scholar, or a group of them, pause to enjoy some aspect of the natural setting, here 3 of them, waited on by 2 boy servants, have found a comfortable place in a bamboo grove, where they are perhaps playing out a repeat of the 7 Sages theme. One of the boys serves them something on a tray, the other one scoops water from the rushing stream. One of the lofty scholars leans over to offer tea to another, who holds a musical instrument he will play. This is a plucked instrument, not the pipa in this case, but a yuan. This is a leaf in the Palace Museum, Beijing, and it's reproduced as number 88 in the 100 album leaves, or 100 Sung album leaves book. Next. From the same volume, plate 71, and in the same collection, the Palace Museum in Beijing, a fan-shaped leaf bearing the title Returning Late from a Spring Outing, a theme often found in Chinese painting. I can think of examples by Dai Jin and Chu Ying in the Ming Dynasty. Here, it's an official astride a donkey who's returning, wearing his cap of office, accompanied by servants who walk ahead of him and behind him to keep the way clear, and other servants who carry the heavy luggage. They make their way between barricades toward the building, seen dimly in upper right. This is their destination, perhaps his yamen or else a gate leading into the palace grounds. The leafy trees around them and the dimming of those further away catch nicely the sense of lateness and approaching dark, which, to make this point yet once more, is so frequent and strong a theme in Southern Sung painting, especially late Southern Sung. Next, please. Finally, and this really is the last, a fan painting that I know only from a reproduction in the series of picture books on Chinese figure painting that I recently purchased. It's in the Palace Museum, Beijing, and is titled Playing Wei Qi in the Lotus Pavilion. It took me some time to figure out what's going on in this picture. It represents the residence of some scholar gentleman who has built it on the edge of the water, probably a lake, so that part of it projects out over the water. And he grows lotuses around his house, hence the title. This is the Lotus Pavilion. He himself is seen in the nearest open room playing Wei Qi with one of his concubines. Another one lies on the bed behind, waiting perhaps for him to finish the game and come to bed. Truly a vision of an ideal life, from the man's perspective, that is. Two more figures are seen further back in a portion that's separated from the left foreground by a tall willow. One of them is a servant with a large fan who stands on the veranda, looking down at a woman in a simple boat below who's leaning over to pick or gather something, probably lotus root. The other woman, seen at the far middle right, must be the principal wife, who sits at a long table with something on it. She's the one who has to run the household. Well, leaving aside the feminist objections to this male vision, let's look at the composition. It's quite complex spatially, with the inside-outside arrangement. One of the many interesting aspects of Southern Sung Academy-style painting that deserves attention is this capacity for creating spatial designs that draw the eye into and around buildings, back into distance, to explore further spaces. Nothing like this was to be seen again in Chinese painting until the 17th century, when something like it was to return, this time partly inspired by foreign pictures the artists could see. What we see here is, of course, entirely indigenous. It must be, in some part, a survival or a revival of the concern with multi-space compositions that we saw in an earlier lecture, 7a, the first one on 5 Dynasties painting. Well, to illustrate my point, let me bring back a few examples that we've seen in previous lectures. Next, please. This fan painting, seen earlier in this lecture, is somewhat similar in composition, but includes a far distance area in the upper right. Here, too, our gaze is drawn down into the interior spaces of the house, the kitchen at above right, where a servant prepares food, and the main room in lower left, where the host sits with his guests, while another servant greets a new arrival at the entrance off the street. Next. This detail shows how we can see across the main room to the opposite wall, on which paintings are mounted, as so frequently they are in representations of interiors in these pictures. We've seen others. Next, please. A closer detail, which I came upon in my old slide collection, reveals this even more clearly. The paintings are landscapes, horizontal, ink on silk, much like the ones we've seen in other paintings within paintings. Next, please. This fan painting I showed for its subject, summoning the concubine, in Lecture 7a. Now we can see it as another example of the Southern Sung Academy-style masters' skillful construction of inside-outside compositions. The concubine in the room in the lower right is being awakened, you remember, by a court woman, while another woman is at her window directing a younger girl who picks flowers to put in her hair, and other women who accompany her to the emperor's chamber, who are waiting up above. Next, please. Or this fan painting in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, which I showed in Lecture 9c in a group of pictures of playing children. The busy mother is indoors doing something with the baby while looking out at the children who are playing outside in the yard, and the maid, you see, is also looking out. As these examples all illustrate, along with many others that I've shown, these masters are able to embed implicit narratives in their pictures, which, if they were spelled out at length, would be stories. I spoke of these two earlier in this lecture. That is the idea of implicit narratives. Next, please. These are two examples seen before. One of the woman who has come to the entrance of her house in the evening to observe the maid gathering fireflies. They used to do that apparently in transparent things to make lanterns. We wonder whom else she's waiting for, or whom inside she's temporarily escaping from. It's that kind of picture. It evokes that kind of a question. In the other, which I discussed at length with details, an implicit story is revealed if we look closely at what we are shown through the boat windows. Next, please. And finally, really finally this time, this fan painting that I showed at the end of my lecture on Yuan is quite likely his work, in spite of an old, unconvincing attribution to Zhao Boju, showing palace ladies gathered for moon viewing at the Mid-Autumn Festival. Another example with multiple spaces into which our gaze is drawn as we absorb the event and its setting, into lighted palace rooms, into the top of the tower at left where the ladies will gather, back through the garden to the distant hills. These spatial and narrative depths make up an aspect of Southern Song Academy painting that merits an extensive study. And the study will also take full account of the fact that these examples that I've shown are all fan paintings. Why did Southern Song gentlemen and ladies want spatially complex paintings on the fans that they carried around and gazed into when they were otherwise unoccupied, and pictures with implicit narratives embedded in them? The immediate answer to that is obvious, because they enjoyed prolonged visual absorption into these pictures, which stimulated imaginings, letting them fill out the narratives in their minds, as I do in lecturing about them nearly a millennium later. There, now I've given someone a great dissertation topic, and with that I really close this lecture.